Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome back. So we are on Daf Kaf Gimel Amud Aleph towards the end of the Gemara, going on to the next Mishnah. Maybe just before we jump in, I'll share with you a couple of interesting questions Rav Zilberstein discusses in Chashukei Chemed related to what we saw already. So one of the things we saw, the Mishnah said, we learned yesterday, that the Mishnah said we're going through the procedure of the Makkot, how it takes place. One of the things we discussed yesterday in terms of who is appointed as the Shaliach Beit Din to do this. Is it somebody who has got the extra force, extra strength, or extra intelligence, etc.? Part of the procedure is that the Mishnah said that he has to hit with one hand. So we saw yesterday the Gemara said that when he lifts up the whip, he lifts it up with two hands, but when he administers the lashes, only with one hand. And there's that with one hand will be a little bit stronger. And he has to give a makarabah with all of his force. So the interesting question which comes up here, which has nothing to do with Makkot, but it's always fascinating to see how different areas of Torah are connected and related to one another. So the question here is, somebody made a mistake in Tfilat Musaf and said Yadecha instead of Yad. Have a look at this. He says, somebody is davening Musaf on one of the Shlosh Regalim. And we have the words in Musaf that we say, Yad shenishtacha b'mikdashecha. So he said, B'mkom lama mipnei hayad, instead of saying the hand, Ama mipnei yadecha shenishtachu b'mikdashecha. A person said, your hands, which went against your mikdash, meaning Yadecha, mean your hands, which is in plural. This is obviously part of a greater question here of anthropomorphism, which is the question is, we know that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't have physical characteristics. How can it be that we speak about him in that way, right? So the Rambam, famous Rambam, says Dibrat Torah b'lashon b'nei Adam, that the Torah is speaking in a mashal, speaking in a way that we can understand. The difficulty with that is that the Torah says you can't do that. You can't give physical attributes to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so there's discussion in terms of that, how we understand it. But for our purposes, so it says, we say in our tefillah, and the person said, he's already got into the bracha, and he said it. Would a person then have to go back and daven again? Would they have to go and correct the bracha? Maybe they said the wrong word slightly, but it's still got the same meaning, and it's not actually going to be me'akev in terms of accepting the tefillah. And since he's already come to the end of the bracha, maybe he doesn't have to go back. So says Rav Zilberstein Tshuva, B'sefer Baruch Shama Katuv, Shelachen Katuv Chazam Nehayad Shenishtalcha, Amazing. He says the reason why at Tefillah it says b'yad and not yadecha, it says b'yad echat, is from our Gemara, from our Mishnah, that it's this was a very, very painful blow, so to speak. It's more painful with one hand than it is with two. Right, that's what we saw yesterday. That's how the Marsha explains, Gemara, that with one hand it's more of a with more strength, with more force. I don't remember Tfilat Musaf, he says that's what we say, precisely what we say in Tfilat Musaf. So he says there are others who give a slightly different perush. And he says, therefore, he says, if you have already completed, you would not have to go back and repeat the bracha. Even though you've changed the language, this is not the main part of the bracha, and therefore it will still be Yotzei B'diavad. And he says, therefore, even if you haven't finished, you don't have to go back and repeat those words. But interesting that Perush comes out from here. Says Rav Zilberstein, another interesting point. He says, according to this interpretation of the Marsha, what would be the case? For example, again, thankfully this is something which is not so prevalent nowadays. But you think of a situation, extreme cases in a labor camp or something like that, when they force Jews to work on Shabbat and they force them to chop wood on Shabbat, and they say Vim lo yargum, and if not, they will kill them. So it's pikuach nefesh. It's not yargu aval yavor in this situation. Yitachen shadif lachtov b'shnei yadayim. He says maybe then it would be better to chop with two hands, min yachtov b'yad echad, rather than one hand. Ki b'yad echad avodah naset b'kalut. It's easier with one hand. You have a stronger, you can do it with more force, meaning it's easier work through with one hand than with two, maybe counterintuitively. And therefore, so he says sarich yun on that. That should be a question halakha, not l'maaseh. The other question which he discusses over here, which is relating to what we're about to see now, is if kaftuhum v'ratzu beit adin. So what happens if we saw in the Mishnah said that when they administer the lashes, the way they do it, they take the person's hands and they tie his hands to two sides of the pole in front of him, right? And he doesn't stand, he doesn't sit, he's bent over, and that's how they administer the lashes. But he's tied up. So what if the person untied his hands and he ran away, right? Not to an Irmeklat, but he ran away to wherever. He escaped from the Beit Din. He didn't want to get the Makkot. So we're going to discuss now, we're going to see the Gemara actually says that if he ran away, he's actually going to be patur, that the embarrassment that he had from being tied up to receive lashes in the Beit Din, that's already going to exempt him. It doesn't mean that he is allowed to do this in the first instance. But if it happened, he would then be patur. So the question is, it says according to the minhag that they used to have on Erev Yom Kippurim to administer lashes. So what happens if a person was there and he was waiting for this and the person who was meant to be lashing didn't come? I don't know. He got very busy on Erev Yom Kippur and he didn't arrive. Right, so we asked the question like this. The Torah said, there were places where they had this minhag that they would get Makkot after mincha, right? We mentioned this previously when he said one of the reasons why we say in Tfilat Arvit is that is one of the psukim which the Dayanim would read out when they administer the lashes, and part of the reason because this was done between mincha and Mariv, and that's why one of the reasons why we still say this pasuk at Mariv. It says Babeit Yosef Osif. תשמעני למה לא כתב שאתה מנה של מלכות מכפר את עוון, אף על פי שאין לנו דיינים סמוכים כדי להוכות לפניהם, וגם אין בהם עדים שיתרו בו כדי לחייבו מלכות, מכל מקום כרב מקצתי. Says the Beit Yosef, even though nowadays we don't have dainim smuchim, and even though we don't have edim and atra'ah and the whole story, but nonetheless, the person receives malkot, they'll get a certain element of kapara. And therefore, yesh listapek lefi hashitot shesh kapara b'malkot elu. According to those opinions, that one would receive kapara in these malkot, madin, kasher kaftu oto kedei lalkoto, ve'achrei lamalkot lo hagiach. They tied him up to get his malkot, and the person didn't come. Imit kaper lo be'etzem hakvita, or sheyesh enan hakaber malkot achar kach. Do we say that's enough, or you should go and you should get malkot afterwards? End of the day, he says, even in places, again, which nowadays I don't think anyone still does this, but even in those days, places where they would give these malkot Erev Yom Kippur, it's not kapara gemura, and therefore, he says, there's still a certain element of kapara just in tying up. So they were waiting for it, he didn't come, that's enough. He doesn't have to go to another shul to get his malkot. Again, as I say, this is not likely to really take place nowadays, but it's an interesting discussion. So let's see what it says in the Gemara regarding this case. So if you have a look, we're on Daf Kaf Gimel Amud Aleph, there's a Mishnah towards the bottom of the page, so probably about 5 or 6 lines above from the Mishnah. In the middle of the line where it says Amar Shmuel kaftu varatz mi beitin patu. Okay, Shmuel says if they tied him up in order to give him his malkut, and then he escapes with Harry Houdini in the Beit Din, and he managed to untie himself, and he ran away. Right, kaftu varatz mi beitin patu. Then when we find him, when he comes back, he doesn't go back and get his malkut again. He is already exempt from that based on the bizayon that he's already had, right? So this is something we've seen. We saw this yesterday The previous discussion, we saw before that in terms of the assessment that the Beit Din makes if they give the wrong number. There's a really vital element of this idea of Malkut is this bizayon, this embarrassment, the disgrace which a person suffers, and that has a large effect in terms of providing kapara. So they tied him up, he ran away from the Beit Din, he is now patur, he is exempt. Meitive, so we have a challenge on this. We say kala ben balishona ben bashnia potrinoto nifseka retzua bashnia potrinoto b'rishona en potrinoto. Okay, so essentially we have three different cases to discuss. Case number one, which we saw in Shmuel, was where he was tied up and he escaped. Now we challenge that from a Braita, which brings two different cases. One case is kala from the pasuk, which means nikla, which means he was disgraced. And as we saw, as the Mishnah put it, maybe nitkalkel, that he was disgraced in terms of the fact that when they came to give him the Makkot, again, he was so scared and he was so embarrassed by this that he that he performed his needs as a result. So there was discussion in the Mishnah. We saw in the Braita yesterday about whether if it's urine is enough to be a disgrace, or only if it's excrement, if it's a man or a woman, etc. But if he was if he had done that and he had disgraced himself in that manner, that would be enough, and he would therefore be exempt from the lashes. So the Braita says, "Kala bein barishona, bein bashnia potrinoto." In other words, whether this happened to him when they were about to give him the first of the Makkot, or they were about to give him the second of the Makkot. In other words, whether it had started already or not. Ben barishona means this happened to him at the time they raised the whip. They're about to give him the first Makkah, and already this has happened. Or if they've already started whipping. Either way, you put rinot. That is the case of kala. However, nifseka retzua, what if the whip broke? Okay, they've been using the same whip for Makkot. It's been a busy time in Beit Din, and it's worn out, and the whip snaps in half. So there we say nifseka retzua bashnia putrinoto, barishana and putrinoto. Okay, this is going to be the kasha, that if the whip snaps on the second one, meaning when the memoneh is about to give him the second makkah, he's already given him one, and now the whip snaps, there we say he is exempt. However, if it's barishona and putrinoto, if the whip snaps before they've even given him the first makkah, then no, that would not be he would not be exempt. Rivan over here says nifseka retzua, more or less in line with where we're reading. He says if the whip snapped, im bagbashnia nifseka potrinoto, danikla bota ka'a sheikau. Right? If it snapped, if when they lifted up the second time, they lifted up to give him makkah number 2, then it snaps, so then he's exempt. Danikla bota ka'a sheikau, that he was disgraced in that first makkah which they'd already given him. But im kodem shehikau nifseka sherim yado lakot en zokan. But if it was before they had raised it up, meaning before they'd given him one makkah already, the person had raised his hand up and it had snapped. So then that is not considered kala. That is not considered a disgrace. He hasn't had anything done to him yet, and therefore he would not be exempt. So the question is, wait a minute. We said, again, if he was standing, they tied him up, and they'd not started giving him Makkot, and then he managed to escape and he ran away, even though he hasn't received any Makkot yet, he is going to be exempt. That I consider kala. Here you're saying same thing. They've tied him up. He's standing there. He's waiting. The guy lifts up the whip. They hasn't hit him yet, and it snaps. We say he's not exempt. Only when he starts whipping him. So which one is it? That is the challenge. That is the difficulty on Shmuel. Amar Shmuel kaftu v'ratzim Beit Din patu. And we said meitiv kala ben barishona ben b'shnia potrinoto. Nifseka retzua. It's this case of where the whip snaps. B'shnia potrinoto, barishona en potrinoto. So says the Gemara now. The question is, why not? It says le'avei karatz. Let it be. It should be the same case as one who runs away. Just as in the case of one who runs away, we say that he's exempt, even though he hasn't received any Makkot yet. So too in the case where the whip snaps, we should say he should be exempt, even though when the whip snaps, even though he hasn't received any Makkot yet. But as we saw, the bride said that is not the case. So the answer is Hatam Ratz Achalo Ratz. Okay, what does that mean? Over there he ran away. Over here he did not run away. In other words, when he has to go and he has to run away from the Beit Din, that in and of itself is a disgrace. Meaning in the case where he's just standing there, he hasn't done anything differently. He hasn't gone and run away, and he hasn't experienced embarrassment in that way. Therefore, we have to. He would not be exempt, but only in the previous case would he be. Okay. Continues the Gemara. Now we are 3 lines above the Mishnah. Tanu Rabbanan. There's a little bit of a tongue twister here. So Tanu Rabbanan, Amduhu lichsheyilke yikle. Okay. So they made the assessment, right? We saw before that when the Beit Din comes along and makes the assessment of how many Makkot the person can withstand, so they also make an assessment if they think that not only is he not going to be able to withstand the Makkot, but already he's going to disgrace himself. When they start out of fear and out of embarrassment, right? He's going to urinate or excrement at that point. If they think that's going to happen, if they think that's going to happen when he, how exactly would they know? I'm not sure. But if it seems to be that this is what is going to happen once he starts getting the Makkot, so then we don't have to wait for it to actually happen in practice. The person would already be exempt. But that is only if it's going to happen when he starts receiving the Makkot. But if the Omer is lichshetzeh mi Beit Din yikle, so I think it's the Bachya changes the gears slightly from kala to yikle, right? That seems to read better in terms of the structure of the sentence. It says if they assume if they say he's going to embarrass himself when he has received the Makkot, so then potrinato. If they say it's going to happen Beit Din yikle malkinato. If it that after all the Makkot and he's on his way out of Beit Din, then he's going to embarrass himself. So then no, then we still give him the Malkot. And not just that, meaning even if this is going to happen right at the beginning, meaning before they have started the Malkot, so that does not exempt him either. There we say Malkinoto shnema vehikau venikla, meaning it's when he is hit and then he's embarrassed, not that happens before when he comes to Beit Din. Just the Rivan over there says, right? If this happens before he gets any makkah, then he still gets the makkah afterwards. Okay, we now have a Mishnah which goes back to the Mishnah that we saw at the very, very beginning of our Perek, which we'll see in a moment. And then this Mishnah contains a number of different Agadic teachings, which is not so common, but it's not unheard of, that the Mishnah teaches us a number of different Agadic things. We'll see one of them is a very, very famous statement. It's always dangerous when you say that something is famous because it may not be famous, but I'm willing to take a gamble that this one you will all agree with me is quite famous. But we'll get there soon. But in the meantime, let's just go back to the beginning of the Perek for a moment. The Mishnah over there taught us that what happened if there was something which a person was chayav karet that a person could get malkut for as well. Right? We spoke about the very beginning of the Perek. We saw in Daf Yud Gimel. We said we spoke about Elohein Elokim, the different isurim for which one is chayav karet, but the person could get malkut for those as well. We spoke about which Tana was who held like that. Now the Mishnah is going to talk about it from a slightly different angle. So our Mishnah over here on Daf Kaf Gimel says 10 daf later. It says, Kol chayavei kritot shelaku, meaning what happens if you have somebody who was chayav karet and they received the Makkot. In other words, how would this happen? The penalty is karet. We spoke in this Perek and previously as well, that everything depends on hatra'ah. Remember, when a person gets hatra'ah, the witnesses see what he's about to be doing and they warn him and they say, what you're doing is forbidden, you're going to get punished via X. So what is X? Even though X is meant to be karet, but if they say you're going to get Makkot, so you would get Makkot. Excuse me. So once the person receives the Makkot, what would happen in terms of the karet? Obviously, Makkot is bidei Beit Din, and karet is bidei Shamayim. Right? Beit Din does not have the jurisdiction to give somebody karet, does not have the ability to give somebody karet. That is a heavenly punishment. So if a person transgressed something which was a chiyuv karet, but they were given hatra'ah for the fact that they would get Makkot, so they're going to get Makkot. Once they get Makkot from Beit Din, is that then going to exempt them from getting the karet, which is bidei Shamayim? In other words, these aid him actually to the person of favor in terms of giving them this earthly punishment, and they would then be exempt from their heavenly punishment. So according to our Mishnah, the answer is yes, that would suffice. Kol chayavei kritut shelaku. Anybody who was chayav karet, and instead they received Makkot, nifteru yadei kritatam. They are then, from that point, exempt from getting their karet. In other words, the Beit Din Shalmala accepts the punishment that is given by the Beit Din Shal Mata. An interesting question, which the Rishonim discuss, is the person at that point required? Does this work if the person does tshuva, or does this work even if the person had not done tshuva? So the Rambam in the Perek Mishnayot, which the Rambam wrote, I think, when he was 19, he says over here, he says, Kvar amanu le'el, shemalkot, im hatshuva machaprin takaret, that Makkot together with tshuva is going to be mechaber takaret. So it's not just an automatic thing. It's not just that the person came into the Beit Din and they received their Makkot and it's over. No, the person came into the Beit Din and they received their Makkot and they did tshuva as a result. Then they are going to get their kapara. The truth is that in Hilchot Tshuva, the Rambam says, he says a similar idea. Right at the beginning of Hilchot Tshuva, believe it or not, we are coming up to Elul is not that far away. We're going to be studying Hilchot Tshuva again. There are those who say we just passed Rosh Chodesh Tammuz. There are those who say that Tammuz, if you take the letters, it's Roshei Tevot. It doesn't work in order. So it depends if you like a mattress and things, if you're going to appreciate this word. But there are those who say the letters of Tammuz stands for Zman Tshuva Mamashmeh Tshuva, meaning the time of Tshuva is getting closer. We then get to Av, which stands for Elul Ba. So it's on the way. It's not that far away, believe it or not. But Rambam here in Hilchot Tshuva, the first halacha, he talks about how every mitzvah in the Torah you can perform tshuva for it, and then he says tshuva is the ikar, and then he says the following. He says, "V'chem ba'alei chata'ot v'shamot be'et shemevin korbanotem asher gatanu al-tonah ein nikapel lehem b'korbanam ad she'asu tshuva." Somebody who has to bring a chatat or an asham, somebody has to bring a korban, right, where they've done something b'shogeg or b'meizid, their korban would not give them kapara until they have done tshuva and they've said vidur. And so too, v'chein chol mechoyavei mitot beit din mechoyavei malkot ein mitkaper lehem b'mitano b'likatan ad she'asu tshuva v'yitvadur. Right, this is quite frightening. Meaning somebody can come, somebody can be have a mitat beit din, be put to death by the beit din or receive malkot. And we've discussed at length how part of the reasoning for these punishments is to provide kapara. Says the Rambam, they would only get that kapara if together with that they did tshuva, did sincere and genuine tshuva as well. Without that, it wouldn't work. And he says as well, somebody who had caused a monetary or physical damage to somebody else, he needs to pay back that which he owes, etc. So there, the Rambam's talking about just if you just have malkut by itself, somebody's chayav malkut in and of itself, he talks later on about if you did something just have karet, what you do about that. Where do you get tshuva from? Kapara from there. Tshuva is not going to be enough. You need Yom Kippurim as well. But so here we're talking about the case where instead of getting the karet, so they received the Makkot. So says the Rambam, if in the same way that when you chayav Makkot, you need to do tshuva for the Makkot to be mechaper, so too, you would, along with the Makkot, you would need to do tshuva, and only then you would be exempt from the karet. The Baal HaMaor, by the way, says no. Baal HaMaor says that you should read this simply, that once you get the Makkot, that is enough, and you would then be patur from karet as well. Okay, so that is the first then of the Mishnah. How do we know that? What is the proof? Shenema v'nikla achicha leinecha kshelaka hareu keachicha. Right? The pasuk said v'nikla achicha leinecha. This is after the Makkot. Your brother will be in front of your eyes, will be embarrassed, will be disgraced. Right? V'nikla, but it says v'nikla achicha. Meaning once this is taking place after the Makkot has already taken place, he's once again called Achicha, called your brother. He's part of the people. If he was not, if he was Chayav Karet, he would not be called Achicha because he is cut off. So therefore, Kshelaka Hareu Achicha, Divrei Rabbi Chananya ben Gamliel. So this is the opinion of Rabbi Chananya ben Gamliel. We're going to see in the Gemara that not everybody agrees with Rabbi Chananya ben Gamliel, but that is the din of the Mishnah. Now we continue on to some, as from a related point, some different agaric teachings. So V'amar Rabbi Chananya ben Gamliel, Ma'em ha'over avera achat, notel nafsho alea, ha'oseh mitzvah achat, al achat kama v'kama, shetinaten lo nafsho. Says Rabbi Chananya ben Gamliel further. He says, if we say that with one avera, a person can lose everything, right? A person can completely lose, give everything up. Their soul can be lost. They can be chayav karet. Karet means are completely cut off. Different opinions in the Rishonim as to what exactly karet means and how exactly this plays out. There are those who understand that it means that a person will die childless. There are those who understand that a person will die young. There are those who understand that it's something only in the spiritual world. It has no expression in this world. But there is a sense of being lost. There is a sense of being cut off from your people. There is a sense of you have given up your alam haba, so to speak. He says that can happen with one avera. So all the more so we understand the power that we understand from here, the power of one action. We understand the power of one avera to lose everything. We understand the power of one mitzvah to gain everything. That his soul will be given to him, so to speak. There is in a couple of places in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah, for example, talks about a couple of stories. Talks about that there is one who can acquire their entire world right in one moment. There's a famous story of Rabbi Chananya ben Teradion. Rabbi Chananya ben Teradion was being put to death by the Romans, and he was they wrapped him up in the Sefer Torah, and they put steel wool sponges to make it take longer. And he said to the Roman the official who was there, he said, can you remove it? It was very, very painful. Can you remove it so that I'll die quicker? And the Roman official said, what will I get for it? Will I enter the world to come? And he said, yes, we'll go together. And it says that he did it, he did tshuva, and it says that both Rabbi Chananya ben Teradion, together with the Klastanori, which is this official, they enter the world to come. The Gemara says another story about called Rabbi Elazar ben Durdaya, somebody who had sinned sexual immorality in the most terrible way, gone all across the world in order to fulfill his desires. And then he suddenly realized, and says he sat down and he did the serious tshuva. He realized, and it says, Yesh koneh olamo b'sha'ah achat. There are those who acquire their entire world in one moment. It says that Rabbi Bacha, the Rabbi cried when he saw these things, and he said, and he cried about the fact that one can acquire their world in one moment. Why was Rabbi crying? One of the explanations he was crying was that if that's the power of one moment, what can be done? Imagine a person can spend their entire life, how much potential we have and how much potential there is that is wasted. So a person can acquire everything in one moment. with one mitzvah, right? It's not recommended. It's not recommended to wait for that one moment and then get everything. But that is the power of each and every mitzvah, says the Mishnah. So we continue. So Amar Rabbi Kenigsberg ben Gamliel, Mama over avera achat notel nafsho aleh, oseh mitzvah achat al achat kama v'kama shtatenu nafsho. Rabbi Shimon Omer mimkomo lamad, says where does he learn this from? Right, he learns it from this place, from these very psukim. Shenema v'nichratu hanefashot haosot v'chulei. The psukim talking about yisod karet, right? And then it says, Asher yaseh otam adam v'chai b'hem. In other words, on the one hand, it says, if you don't fulfill the mitzvot, right? Nichratu hanefesh haoseh. But if you do fulfill, then it says v'chai b'hem, and you will live in them. So that's showing us that for not transgressing the averot, one can actually receive reward. And he means Hakol hayoshev v'lo avar avera no schako. Same mitzvah. He says anybody who sits and is not transgressing an avera receives reward as if they have fulfilled the mitzvah. Okay. Rabbi Shimon bar Rabbi Omer, Harei Omer rak chazak lebirti achol adam. We have a pasuk that says there's a prohibition of eating blood. Of drinking blood, right? It's rak chazak, to strengthen yourselves and not to eat the blood, ki adamu hanefesh, etc. ומה אם האדם שנפשו של אדם קצה ממנו, הפורש ממנו מקבל שכר, גזר ועריות שנפשו של אדם מתאבן להן ומחמתן, הפורש ממנו על אחת כמה וכמה. What do we learn from there? Yeah, it says rak chazak. It says just don't eat blood. It says who would want to eat blood? Blood is something which is disgusting. It is repulsive. And nonetheless, the Torah tells us that just like damaim dam shenafsho shel adam katsa mimeno, that generally speaking, a person would be repulsed by this, a person would be disgusted by this. But nonetheless, apolesh mimeno, if you still refrain from eating it, mikabel schar, you receive reward. Wow. So therefore, if things that we don't want to do anyway, and yet the Torah is giving us reward for not doing them, so gezel v'arayot, theft, and forbidden sexual relations. These are things which are very tempting, and these are things which a person's nature is drawn after them. A polish man, and there one refrains from it. And achat kama v'kama, she's kelo, uledorotav, the reward will come not just for him, but for his generations and future generations until ad sof kol hadorot. How much more so as a reward for refraining from the things which it is not so easy to refrain from, but one has to fight against the nature, and one has to fight against the yetzer in order to fulfill it. And now comes the famous line. I'm sure you all agree with me. This is famous. Rabbi Hanania ben Akasha Omer HaKadosh Baruch Hu lezakot Yisrael lefichach cheba lehem Torah mitzvot shnema Hashem chavetz man tzidko yagdir Torah v'yadir. That's not the end of the shiur. Don't say Kaddish, but that is the Mishnah. That is the famous sentence that we say right at the end of having learned a piece of Torah. This is what was established. This is the Ma'amar Chazal, which we say, and then we're able to say a Kaddish D'Rabbanan afterwards. So what is it actually saying? We say it every day. We hear it so often we probably don't think about it. But Rabbi Hanania ben Akasha says Ratzah Kadosh Baruch Hu lezakot et Yisrael. So we have to explain exactly what lezakot means. For the moment, let's go with a simple explanation that lezakot means to give merit. Kadosh Baruch Hu wanted to give us schut, and therefore lefichach Yibalaim Torah mitzvot. He gave us many mitzvot, and 613. Later on, our Gemara, we're going to see the source where we get the idea of 613 mitzvot on this very daf. That's also something famous. But Shneimar Hashem chafetz leman tzedko. Hashem wanted to give us righteousness, right? Yagdil Torah v'yadir. That's the pasuk in Yeshayahu. So if you think about it, a little bit counterintuitive. You might think, right, a person, if Hashem wants to make it easy for us, Hashem wants to give us merit, why did He give us so many instructions, so many things that we have to do? Sometimes it's like when a parent gives a child instructions, in the morning you're trying to get out of the house and everything's taking a long time. So do this, do that, and sometimes the kid will just raise the hand and say, "You told me to do so many things. I don't know what to do. Put on your shoes, put on your this, do that." right? Just tell me one thing to do and I can listen. I can follow the instructions. You're giving me 613 instructions. How are we meant to follow them? That is so the Mishnah says Rabbi Hanania, you have to change your perspective. It's the opposite way around. It says, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants your good, that's why he gave you so many instructions. But we have so many mitzvot and we have so many things to do, and it's so difficult to accomplish all of them. So how do we understand? So there are a number of different interpretations in the Rishonim. So the first thing is, says the Rivan. The Rivan understands that, and it makes a lot of sense in the context of what we've been discussing. Right? The previous sentences in the Mishnah spoke about somebody who refrains from doing an Aveirah as if they fulfill the mitzvah. And then we spoke about things which a person wouldn't want to do anyway, that you still get a reward for that. So it says Rivan over here, Zakot et Yisrael, the second line on the page. He says, Kedei sheyu mekablin schar b'ma shemonin atzman min averot lefichach yirba lahen. It says the Rivan, what is Rabbi Hanania talking about? Not the things that you have to do. He's talking about the mitzvot lo taseh, the things you don't have to do. There are lots of things which a person wouldn't do anyway. Right? One of the Rishonim discuss, why does the Torah have to command about? Not all the Rishonim accept this, but Rasag, for example, and others talk about group the mitzvot into different categories of what's called the mitzvot sichliot, maybe the mitzvot shimiyot, meaning mitzvot which have a logical reason, which we would have done anyway if the Torah hadn't commanded it to us. There's a Gemara that says that all certain characteristics, had they not been commanded in the Torah, we would have learned them from the animals. We would have learned from the ant to be hardworking and etc. So most people, we like to think, would not go out into the streets and just go and, mass murdering rampages, even if the Torah hadn't commanded it, because that's not something a person would do. There are others, by the way, who understand. No, the world once upon a time was different. You look at, you go back into ancient history, and maybe not even such ancient history, and you see a world where people are lacking the most basic standards of morality, and you see maybe without the Torah we wouldn't have fulfilled it. But according to this interpretation, we say that there are many things the Torah gave us: don't steal and don't kill and whatever it is, that we wouldn't have done anyway. Nonetheless, don't eat blood. We wouldn't have done that anyway. But nonetheless, the Torah gave us all these commands. Why? So that, because Hashem wanted to give us chut, wanted to give us the merit, and that we'd have the reward for it. So that is how Rivan understands here. He says, Kedei sheyu mekablin sachar b'ma shemonin atzmanim min averot, in order to receive reward by refraining from these averot, lefichach yirba lahen, and therefore the Torah included many of them. שלא היה צריך לצוות כמה מצוות וכמה אזהרות, השקצים ונבלות שאין לך אדם שאינו קץ בהם. Right, there are many things which it did not happen to, the Torah did not need to command us about, for example, right, shkatzim and nevelot, eating all sorts of disgusting things, insects. Right? No, the Rivan didn't know that a few centuries after his time, there would be a whole movement of alternative proteins and people going farming insects and deciding to eat them and trying to create a cultural change in that way. But for the most part, most of human history, most people thought that these were disgusting, and therefore a nafsho shel adam katza b'hem, that a person finds them repulsive and wouldn't eat them anyway. The Torah commanded it so that we would receive this reward for the fact that we don't do it. The Rambam learns a little bit differently. The Rambam in his Perek on the Mishnayot over here, the way he explains is that you can only receive really the benefit of fulfilling a mitzvah, olam haba, is when you do it completely l'shem shamayim. The Rambam says in his Perek Mishnayot, he says, "Misodot ha'emunah b'Torah, shemkiyem adam mitzvah mishlosh v'shesh me'ot mitzvot kara'ui v'kehogen." He says it's only if a person fulfilled a mitzvah completely, fully, appropriately, v'lo shitef im ha'matara mimatarot ha'olam hazeh klal, but did not have any ulterior motives when fulfilling it. Ela asa'ah lishma me'ava, k'mo she'b'at lecha, he did it out of lishma, out of love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, then harei hu zocheh b'lachei olam haba, then he will receive the life in the world to come. לכן אמר רבי חנניה, כי מחמת ריבוי המצוות, אי אפשר שלא יעשה אדם אחד בכל ימי חייו בשלמותה, ויזכה להישארות הנפש באותו מעשה. In other words, he says that if there was only one mitzvah to fulfill, some people fulfill it better, some people less, but by giving us so many mitzvot, that surely at some point in your lifetime, he says all you need to get into Olam Haba is one. But you need one that you've done properly. says you have 600 opportunities, but not this. It kind of sounds like if we're medayek from the Rambam, not necessarily from the fact that there are 613 mitzvot, but maybe it means to say that if you're Torah mitzvot, the number of opportunities, you have infinite opportunities each and every day of different deeds that you can do. At some point, a person's going to get one of them right. Hopefully, says the Rambam, and you'll get one of them right, and with that you're going to be zocher to the to Chayei Olam Haba. There's a Gemara in I think it's Masechet Shabbat where a number of the sages discuss what is their mitzvah. Each one has one mitzvah which they fulfilled to an extent that nobody else was able to, and through that they would merit a reward in the world to come. So that is how the Rambam understands. The Rivanya says about the things that we don't do, but that we wouldn't have done anyway. We get it for them reward. Rambam seems to understand it's about the things that we do, but we have to do them properly, and it's very hard to get it right. But if there's so many opportunities, so hopefully you'll get something right, and in that way. So that is how we understand Lagdil Torah Ulhadira. Okay, so that is the end of the Mishnah. The Gemara is going to discuss, but we're out of time for today. So have a good day, everyone, and Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day, everybody.
Shalom.